Hi class! Welcome again for another lecture of our Meremy course, which is entitled The Research Process. So let's get started. Hi class! Welcome again for another lecture in our Meremy course, which is entitled The Research Process. Allow me today to walk you through the typical research process or phases of research. So let's start off with the problem recognition and identification. It is important that we identify first a specific problem that we want to pursue in our research. After we already have the problem statement, we now do a comprehensive literature review. This would now collectively summarize all the research that has been done on a specific topic. Then, we would conduct a selection of an appropriate methodology for the specific problem statement that we have identified. And we would execute now the plan for the methodology that we have identified. After we have gathered information or data from the execution of the methodology, we now analyze the results and try to compare the results that we have gathered based on the objectives that we have set forth initially in our research study. Once we have gathered all the informations, analyzed the results, we are in a good position now to disseminate the results and identify future research opportunities. So let's start first in discussing the problem recognition and identification. In identifying the problem, we have mentioned that in our previous video that inspiration is an essential component for us to identify a specific problem in our research. Allow me to share to you some of the sources of where we can get some research problems. So first, we can look at current technological trends. One example is the internet. As mechanical engineers, what we can do is try to implement IT or information technology in our system, in our prototypes, or in our ideas. Next, we can look at some of the contemporary problems that we are facing, both in the national or in the global arena. Nowadays, we have climate change as a big issue or problem in the engineering field. So we may look at perhaps the reduction of carbon dioxide emission as a mechanical engineering project. And if we try to look at the production of energy, there is a lot of carbon dioxide emission in producing various types of energy streams. So we may look at how to design an energy system efficient enough or sustainable enough to produce the needed energy while reducing the carbon emissions. Next, we may look at published research findings or disseminated research findings. We can look at journal publications as a source of our problem statement. Also, we can communicate with other researchers, especially who is specializing on a specific field of study. We may want to network with other researchers abroad, or in fact, even in our country. We can also communicate with other researchers working on, say, renewable energy or mechatronics. Now, let's try to look at some things to consider in identifying a research problem. Let's start first with the relevance. We may want to answer this question: what benefits will be derived from the research? So it is essential for researchers to also consider the benefit of the research that we would be conducting. We need to identify who would benefit from the study and what would be the significance if we are able to address that specific problem. Next, we have to consider the feasibility. This is very important, especially for you guys who's taking their thesis in the next couple of terms. So we have to answer this question: can the project be completed given the projected working condition? is it really feasible to accomplish this amount of activity in a given amount of time? So we have to be very realistic on the objectives that we would be setting for our research. Once we already have identified the problem, we now are ready to do a comprehensive literature review. In doing a literature review, prior conducting the research work, literature review provides essential background information. So this is where we would now gather some informations about a specific topic or about our problem statement. Next, insights on promising research areas may be found on published works. So it is essential for us to have access to published papers on a specific topic or our topic for the problem statement. Next, the collection of published works on a given topic reveals potential research gaps. And this is one of the advantage in doing your literature review. A good literature review is able to collect all the information for that specific field and be able to identify the studies that has been already done and identify also the research gaps on that specific field. The literature review also identifies the research areas which have already been examined or conducted. So it is important for us to collect all those information, identify all those research that has been done, and identify the research gaps. So next, what would be the sources of our literature review? So first and foremost, we can access our journal publications. I'll post a video specifically on how to access Elsevier publications or Science Direct publications, or in fact even IEEE publications. So watch out for that video. Next, conference proceedings. We may want to search the internet or perhaps have access to conference proceedings wherein some of the researchers present their thesis as part of their initial dissemination. So this is also one source of information on how to do a literature review. Next, books and monographs. We can access our library for books and monographs specifically on a specific topic. Also, research reports can be accessed through the library. And lastly, MS and PhD thesis can also be a source of literature review for our problem statement or our chosen topic. And lastly, one of the most used source of literature review nowadays is the internet. Let's go now to the selection of an appropriate methodology. Engineering research can be classified as either experimental or non-experimental or computational. So we have to identify if the problem statement that we have identified is experimental methodology applicable for answering that specific problem, or do we need computer simulations or non-experimental methodology to answer those questions. So it is essential for us to already consider or select what would be an appropriate methodology. Next, we have to answer if the research that we would be doing would be applied or basic. Applied meaning one that would involve a development of an apparatus or a prototype. Then a basic research would involve only somehow a prediction, a model, or an equation. We can relate basic research to computational studies or some initial experimental studies, while an applied research would involve development of a prototype or a physical model. Next, we have to also consider if the problem statement that we have selected is a focused research or an interdisciplinary research. When we say interdisciplinary, this would involve various fields of sciences or courses. As an example, I'm also doing research on microalgae, and this is somehow more towards interdisciplinary since microalgae involves biology, physics, and some of the process would involve drying and processing. So we would need some mechanical engineers and chemists and chemical engineers in those studies. So somehow my research is categorized as an interdisciplinary. In your case, perhaps you may want to focus only on a specific technology. Say you want to focus on wind energy. How do you now design a wind turbine? Or perhaps you may want to focus on microhydro or picohydro. So that is somehow a focus type of research. All right. So let's go now to the execution of the methodology. Let's tackle first the critical issues that we need to consider. First, we have to account for the financial resources. Of course, as students, you have some limits on your financial budget for your thesis. The first thing that you need to consider as a group or as a team. Next, we have to also consider the physical resources. Most of the undergrad studies or undergrad theses are more on experimental, applied, and somehow would involve a focused type of research. So physical resources are very important, such as spaces. We have to consider where we would conduct our research. Is it at school or at home, or should we rent a specific area, or do we now collaborate with a specific company? Next, an example would be computational power or computational resources. If we are doing some computational studies or simulation, we have to consider that. Another example would be availability of materials or equipment. This is an important factor in doing experimental studies. So we have to consider the source of our raw materials, and we also have to consider if the equipment is available. Next, we have to somehow consider also manpower. I know that the undergrad thesis, you would be working in a group. You have to manage the number of hours or the manpower or the capacity of the team to deliver all of the objectives and all of the activities. Another thing to consider is your time. Since in doing research, you also have your other activities, your academic activities or your academic obligations. You also have to deliver the objectives of your thesis. Once we have executed already the methodology and we already have gathered the information or data from our research, we now then analyze the results. Ideally, the results of our study should be compared to our objectives. We have to consider the baseline of our results and how it would compare to the results of other studies. Next, results may be inconclusive, in which case further work is indicated. So some of the works, and don't be disheartened if your study is inconclusive. Somehow, if your study is inconclusive, additional work needs to be done on that specific research. Next, the research process is cyclic. Thus, definitive results might be difficult to obtain. So broad objectives must be broken down into feasible sub-problems. So sometimes we have chosen a very broad problem statement only to find out when we're doing the research that we need to break down the problem statement to specific objectives or specific statements. In doing that, this would also allow us to identify future research studies from our initial problem statement. Next, once you already have gathered the results, we now are ready to disseminate the results of the study. Dissemination provides an opportunity to conduct a critical review of the research findings. Dissemination provides an opportunity to conduct a critical review of the research findings. We now open our research for others to criticize or comment on our research. So perhaps what we can do is to consult our faculty advisors for some of the suggestions on how to improve our thesis and our manuscript. Next, research dissemination can be done through publication or presentation in a conference or symposiums. So these are two avenues of dissemination. Either we publish or present it in conferences or symposiums. Next, publication provides essential information to other researchers. Thus, this would now be part of the pool of knowledge. So perhaps a young researcher would come along and use your research as their literature review. Next, conference presentations provides an avenue to solicit experts' opinion to comment on the results of our work. So, in presenting our work in conferences or in symposiums, we are able to get comments from experts or specialists in the field and be able to identify future studies for us to improve our research in the future. Let's discuss the cyclic nature of research. The research process is cyclic and iterative. So as mentioned, once we already have disseminated our research, especially if we present this to experts, experts can identify perhaps room for improvement in our research. And that room for improvement can be another idea or another topic for another researcher looking for a problem statement. So this is cyclic and iterative. Continuity is essential. In doing research, everyone actually benefits. Perhaps another researcher from another country is looking for answers in his problem. It just so happens that you are already working on that specific problem. So your work is very important on that field. Once you have published your work would be part of the pool of knowledge which can be used now by other researchers as their literature review. Next, concerted effort of specialists from different disciplines may be needed to solve large problems. So this is very important. If we have chosen a broad problem, then we may need to consult other specialists from various fields. So in summary, we are able to discuss the typical research process, which starts with the problem recognition and identification, then the literature review, then we went to discussing the selection of an appropriate methodology and executing the methodology. Once we have gathered the data or information, we then now analyze the results and prepare a presentation or a manuscript to be disseminated. And lastly, we have also shown how to identify future research opportunities through the dissemination process. I would like to invite you to watch the other videos. We already have posted a couple of videos in our Canvas online class. Please check out the Introduction to Research. I also have posted the parts of a thesis proposal and also skills you need in writing your thesis proposal. That's it for today, class. If you like this video, please hit the like button or share this video. Better yet, subscribe to this channel. Until next time, bye!